Hello and welcome back to Unmasking the Trans Movement with John Uhler. I'm your host, Brad Wilder. Today, part one of a two-part series with Jeremy Williams. Lots to discuss. Dr. Ann Gillies is also with us today, and John is also here too. So we're going to get the perspective of, well, three different professionals, three different individuals who are, well, I'll say neck deep in this whole trans movement, and they bring a lot to the show and to the table today. So let's get right into it. John, great to have you here as always. Dr. Ann is also on cam now, and Jeremy. So welcome to all of you. Thank you very much for being here today, guys.
Thank you.
Well, Brad, thank you. And we are privileged to have Jeremy with us. There is an issue that is oftentimes used to confuse people, the issue of intersex. We see that floated a lot, and that is used to kind of push people back on their heels and silence those that have legitimate questions as far as whether or not this movement is harming people. And Jeremy is one that deals with or has wrestled with that condition, and he is going to tell his story. And I'm so appreciative of Dr. Ann Gillies, who is going to introduce Jeremy.
Thanks, John. Brad. Yes, it's good to see you again, Jeremy. We've had our paths have crossed a few times over the last few years as we've kind of petitioned provincial parliaments and the federal government with regard to this whole issue. And so I'm really pleased that you're here, because we definitely need to help parents and grandparents and teachers have some clarity on this particular issue that is a medical diagnosis, and yet it's been addressed by the trans movement and placed under the trans umbrella. How did you ever feel about that, Jeremy?
I kind of felt like we were being used. I found a lot of the politicians and pundits and different organizations were talking about intersex people and how intersex people needed to be able to choose their gender because they were confused. And yet they never talked to any intersex people to find out what their perspective was. So I was a little bit annoyed by that.
And so you should be, because I was pretty annoyed too at all of those proceedings and kind of how they treated you like a non-entity. Actually, it just is pretty much like that. So why don't you? I think it's really, really advantageous if you can just go ahead and share a little bit what intersex, what the condition actually is. You know a lot about it. You've had time to research it and study it, and it's a personal experience for you. So I think coming from the horse's mouth is the absolute best way for people to learn. Why don't you just go ahead?
Well, I discovered late in life that I had an intersex condition. That was a bit of an issue with the local school board, and they were trying to bring in policies to allow transgender or intersex people to go into the girls' locker rooms if they identified as the opposite sex. And so I started researching this because I didn't like this. My daughter was in kindergarten, and I didn't want her growing up in a school where she might have a boy come in while she's changing. And I found out from the Intersex Society of North America, which is not, they're not called that now. I can't remember what they call themselves now, but the original site that I looked at 7 years ago was shut down. But I was born with a defect in my biology that identified me as intersex, and that's what intersex is. It's a chromosomal defect or misprogramming, programming error that can either affect you internally and give you allergies and health conditions, or can affect you externally as well. And you can have slight differences. And I was born with an obvious external defect. So that's kind of what it is.
This is a deficit. You know, it's an anomaly. It's a biological anomaly. It's not something that is a social construct. It's not something that you have decided all of a sudden that you have, and that you need to be recognized because you have it. It's none of those things that we are seeing with the actual cross-sex identifiers.
I didn't choose my gender. I didn't choose to have a defect. I was born with a Y chromosome. Therefore, I am male. My body developed differently.
And you had explained to us at a different time, and I thought it was really, really interesting because you do computer programming. You had this wonderful analogy of kind of how chromosomal deficits happen, but from a metaphor perspective of computer technology. Can you share that? Because I think that's helpful.
Yeah, I'm a programmer, so I look at everything as you have instructions, and those instructions are compiled in what we call a compiler, and then the output product is the program. And if you have errors in your programming, the compiler sometimes will compile the program with some miscommunications or improper instructions, and sometimes it will fail. And that's kind of like what it is with intersex people. You receive a chromosome from your mother in the egg, and you receive a chromosome from your father in the sperm. And sometimes either the egg or the sperm can have a defect. The egg is always an X chromosome, so sometimes there'll be two X's. Sometimes the X will be deformed and it will kind of look like a Y. And then the sperm can have an X or a Y chromosome, and it's the combination of the XX or the XY that causes you to be male or female, Y being always male. And so when intersex happens, is the instruction set from either the father or the mother comes, and it's missing chunks of code. And when the program tries to compile, when the baby tries to develop in the womb, sometimes it works, but a lot of times it doesn't, and you have a miscarriage. But when it does compile, it doesn't create the program the way the author intended it to be created. And so you end up with extra vestigial organs, or you end up not having organs, or you may develop breasts, or you may have a non-functioning uterus. You might be born with no ovaries, or your testicles might not descend. There's a wide variety, and it's all because the instructions that you received at conception were not programmed correctly.
That was a great way of describing it. There is a researcher, a biologist. Her name is Anna Sterling, and in 1993, she kind of acknowledged that intersex was an extremely rare condition. And then in 2020, she kind of changed her viewpoint and said it's fairly common condition. And she put the intersex condition, the medical condition.
It truly is a spectrum. You can call it a spectrum. It really is.
Well, it's a spectrum of not sexuality, but it's a spectrum of dysfunctionality. Do you know what I mean? And that's maybe not the right word. So
it's a spectrum of defect, right? You might have a minor defect, you might have a severe defect, but the spectrum of how bad the defect is quite varied.
That's right. Overall, though, the actual percentage of children who are born with such a defect is fewer than 2 out of every 10,000. So what is that, 0.2%? Is that?
Yeah, there's a lot of debate on how many of the population are intersex, but the highest number that I've seen from reputable sources is 0.3%. But it's the severe defects, the ones that are really affecting your genitals and making it so that you aren't sure whether you're a male or female, that's like 0.03. So
yeah,
it shows you how wide the variation can be.
So Jeremy, for the average parent as well as average person out there, including school board members, would it be safe to say that the majority of us, including those of us that are therapists, will probably never meet a genuinely intersex person?
Yeah, it was quite a surprise to the people in my community when I announced that I was intersex, because they had never met one. So they didn't know what it was. And I spent a lot of time explaining to people what intersex was, because you probably, if you do meet one, you won't even know it, because the majority of them don't display external defects that would be visible to unless you're in an intimate situation.
Okay, and as a matter of fact, this is so crucial, Jeremy, because think about the narrative that's being pushed out there, because cults love to play with the language. Those that are going to manipulate people play with language, and therefore they have really, and you said it very well, they've used intersex people to confuse, first of all, they've used them for a purpose, an agenda, which is absolutely sick in my estimation. Talk about the opposite of sensitivity. But would you speak to, again, what we're being told is, and the confusion for the average person comes in, that we hear, well, these people aren't sure whether or not they're male or female. Your personal story is probably pretty typical, that you didn't even know you had this condition. Would you describe for our audience, because it's very compelling, how it was a shock to you?
Yeah, I mean, when I was born, the doctor immediately identified that I had a condition. But again, that was back 20, 30, well, I won't give my age, but that was many years ago. And they didn't have the science, but they knew something was wrong because I had an external visible defect. And they couldn't go into the details, but my mother did check to see if everything functioned correctly. And so because my defect was minor, I didn't, until I hit puberty, I didn't even know anything. I didn't have people coming up to me and saying, "Hey, do you think maybe you're in the wrong gender?" Right? Because they didn't know, and I didn't display anything. I mean, I'm sure I played with Barbies a couple of times as a kid, but my parents didn't think I was a girl. When I hit puberty, I noticed, based on what I was reading in school and what I knew from my peers, that I wasn't quite what everybody else was that was male. So that's when I asked my mother, and she just told me flat out, we checked everything out. Everything works fine. You're just a little bit different, but it doesn't affect who you are or what you are as a male. And yeah, most people, even a couple of my cousins' kids have the same condition as I do, but it's such a small variation that it doesn't affect their lives typically. For me, it did. I had testosterone issues later in life, but I would have never known.
And Jeremy, what your mother did for you, it occurred to me, she did the genuine affirmation model. She said, "There's nothing wrong with you." That's what we should be telling kids, right? Yes. That you on the inside, you are fine. We all have physical defects, quite frankly. None of us are airbrushed models, even though I want, Brad, right, being a hockey coach. But what your mother did for you, and that's wonderful, unlike the mother of Jazz Jennings, who is at best a profound narcissist. She's a personality disordered individual. And if she would like to come on the program, we'd be more than happy to ask her a number of questions, including why she dilating her child at when he or she, poor Jazz, all right, that is just sick. So we hear that as the affirmation model, but what your mother did, you came with questions and she affirmed your masculinity. And what did that do for you, as best you recall, when she said, "Listen, you're not born in the wrong body. Everything's fine"?
I was like, "Oh, okay." was like, that explains everything. All of my questions were explained, and so I had no more anxiety about it, because like, okay, yeah, so that's what happened. And I even joke about it with, I mean, there's only a handful of people that I've revealed the details to, and one of my close friends, I told him, and we joke about it and say that, oh, I've got extra powers because I'm not your typical man. But it's it's something that we didn't take. My masculinity wasn't questioned, right? I have a Y chromosome, therefore I am male. There are other people which I genuinely understand their concerns and the trauma. I mean, especially if you find out when you're an adult that you're not a woman, you're actually a man. That can lead to some serious psychological concerns and traumatic discoveries. But the overwhelming majority, from the 0.03 to the 0.3, those people will never have anything in their lives. I only found out my condition because I was researching for the school board, and then because I knew what my condition was, that when I had low testosterone, I was able to tell my doctor, I think I have low testosterone. And so we were able to diagnose my condition quicker. A lot of people wouldn't even know what was causing their condition until they had a karyotype test or something like that.
So you knew, your parents knew at birth that there was some kind of biological, deformity, but it wasn't significant enough to really harm to harm you overall as a young boy or a man. And then you ended up then in later years doing some research and finding out what kind of deficit, exactly the chromosomal deficit you had. So I want to share a couple of PowerPoint, just a couple charts that I've done, and I'm just to get your. Oh, I have to go back. How do I go back?
I think you got it.
I have to stop share that one and go back to the other one. Sorry, guys. There we are. Is that sharing yet?
Not yet.
Oh dear. Just when you think you've got it all together.
That's okay.
Oh, I just lost it. I just clicked out of there. Keep talking. I'll get it back. Sorry, guys. I'll be right back with you to get that.
There you go. Okay. Jeremy, I do have another question for you.
Yeah, sure.
So again, what's being pushed on these kids and the narrative by the activists, and this is all being pushed by the activists, is that the confusion that kids have is because they are born in the wrong body and they're fluid. Okay, but so let me ask you, were you inclined to get married? And if so, do you have any kids? And how would you describe your overall adjustment? Because we could say, according to what's being pushed in the affirmation model, that your life should be all screwed up.
Well, because of how my mother handled the situation, actually my dad, I don't want to discredit him, and he's a wonderful father. He completely forgot about it. It was not concerning enough for him to even remember that I had the condition. So my mother affirmed in me that I was male, and so I never questioned it. And I had regular attractions to women, and I always wanted to have kids. I wanted to have a family, so I got married, and I ended up having 2 children, and they're perfectly healthy, and neither of them, thankfully, have the defect. So that's because it can be passed on genetically. I don't know the details. Maybe it does skip a generation. I'm not sure, but I never had any inclination to want to be the opposite sex and want to have a relationship that, I mean, when you try to change your gender, you can never have a normal relationship. because you're essentially trying to force the opposite sex into being attracted to the same sex. And it just, I can't comprehend in my head how they could think that they could force people to like the same sex. I don't know how that works.
Well, I think there's a whole lot of things that go into all of that. I just brought this trans umbrella up because what we wanted to do was just talk for a minute about how intersex condition is actually included in the trans umbrella, with transvestites, cross-sex identified, the rapid onset gender dysphoric children, transsexuals, drag, two-spirit, gender fluid. It's all meshed together. And of course, those are just the tip of the iceberg of the identities. And none of those identities are biologically correct. But intersex is the only one that has a biological root. Even though the trans umbrella and the trans movement is trying to declare that these individuals are born that way, that's not researched. I mean, there's no viable research that proves that. In fact, it proves the other. So the other thing about this, so being part of that group is pretty disquieting for you. I also wanted to include this because we've talked before about the gender unicorn, and Jon, you were talking about this last time, and how children are being so indoctrinated in our classroom, and intersex is right here in the midst of that, right smack in the center. Why don't you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, and I'll speak to that in a moment. Then, Jeremy, what I have pointed out previously is they used to, the pushers of this, trans activists, used to have a gingerbread man, right? And then they claimed, well, it's sexist. You got to have a gingerbread person. So they neutered the, anyway, so they neutered the gingerbread person, and then before you know it, that wasn't okay, which is very interesting. At least the gingerbread person looked like a person, but all of a sudden, poof, we have the gender unicorn. Well, they just kind of hide the reality that the unicorn is the #1 symbol for pedophiles to identify one another. Not only is it a phallic symbol, but interesting in this picture, as Jeremy pointed out to us, look at where they have the picture of the chromosome.
Yeah.
So you can see how they confound all these different subjective things with the biological issue. Jeremy, what comes to mind as you're watching that?
Well, first off, I'm offended. They're throwing me in, and they're throwing intersex people in with a pedophilic symbol, so that's offensive in and of itself. But they're basing their entire worldview, their entire model, on intersex people. If intersex people didn't exist, or were not questioning what their gender was, they would have no basis. That intersex are the foundation of their entire gender theory, that gender is physical, emotional, and expressive, whereas gender is, well, we used to say sex, and gender used to be reserved just for language, but gender is strictly biological. There is no your physical attributes are given by what your sex is, and sometimes that gets confused because of a defect, but the vast majority have no physical outward appearance of a third gender, or of a made up gender. What you feel emotionally doesn't change your biology. How you express your gender doesn't change your biology.
That's right.
Your identity is how you value yourself, not what your biology is. And so I'm really quite offended that they would use my condition as a way to pervert all of society when they never even asked me how it affected me or what questions I had. And for the 1 in 100 million people that has fully developed to appear like a woman when they're a man, they should have asked them. I mean, but they don't even know who they are. They can't even find them. I mean, there's only like half a dozen medical records that show of these cases. So,
and that's crucial, just a half a dozen. As a matter of fact, in case people were shocked by what I mentioned, let me go ahead and see if I will do this technologically. Let's see if there we go. So this was in Austin, Texas. First of all, this guy should be arrested. I want to know why the police didn't arrest this guy. The guys in my sex offender treatment programs want to know why this guy wasn't arrested, and they were for doing similar things. This is worth 5 to 10 years in prison, by the way. This is corruption of minors. And you think this is the first time this guy's done this? And what do you think this guy accesses online? And that's a little boy, by the way. I had perp apologists sit there and say, well, because they won't condemn this. They'll say, well, this is artistry. Really? Look at the horn on his head. Okay, right? They'll say, well, it depends. Maybe maybe the child walked up and surprised him. Right? So it's unbelievable. But look at that symbol. So when they changed it to gender unicorn, yes, that's exactly why they changed it to gender unicorn.
That's a very, well, it's a very disturbing picture. It's also a great picture to really press home exactly what you're talking about. One thing I just wanted to clarify is that gender is not the biological issue here. Sex is biological. Gender is a social construct. It's how we look at our social roles as male and female. And so we have to keep that in mind. The other thing on that gender unicorn little funny little chart was that sex assigned at birth. And so here we have it is so diabolical. Doctors are telling parents, well, your child is a girl. I'm assigning your child as a girl. You know, what's this? But doctors are supposed to be doing this. And I've heard parents say, my doctor said my child was assigned as a girl. What they're doing is influencing the minds of the parents to kind of go, oh, well, maybe this little girl will want to be a boy and turn out to be a boy. How ludicrous can we get? But this is where we're headed. And it's those men that you just showed that are pushing some of this agenda. And that little boy looks like a girl, totally groomed. It's horrific. And Jeremy, I just thank you that you're willing to stand up against this stupidness and this whole agenda.
What I tell people is sex isn't assigned at birth. Sex is assigned at conception.
Yes.
Right. You are either a male or a female, depending on what your father contributes. So, the doctors are just speaking out of both sides of their mouths. They are afraid of blowback against them, and they're willing to put your child through trauma because they're scared for their jobs. And that's what really gets me. We go back and a lot of people define the beginning of life at conception. I'm one of those people. And not only does your life begin at conception, your gender or your sex begins at conception.
Thank you, Jeremy. Jon, over to you.
And thank you. And Jeremy, we can't thank you enough. This is crucial information for parents and policymakers, school boards, for everyone to understand. We have been really fed a lot of lies through this movement, and we need to unmask it. Brad, thank you for your leadership as well, and your helping us to unmask the trans movement.
Well, thank you all for being here. Another compelling show. Part 2 is coming up as well. We have so much to get to. This unmasking the trans movement is something that isn't just going to happen overnight. You need to get deep into it. You need to understand what's going on. And that's exactly why unmaskingthetransmovement.com provides all the resources for parents, grandparents, and children alike to get the help and the knowledge that they need. Till next time, I'm Brad Wilder. On behalf of Jon Uhler, Dr. Ann Gillies, and Jeremy Williams, we'll see you next time.